So when we consider tourniquets, there's two variations. There's the homemade and the commercially bought. Now, of course, the preference would be using something that's actually designed to work as a tourniquet, but there's going to be times, whether it's wilderness, whether it's out and about in a shop that doesn't have a first aid kit or doesn't have a tourniquet in it, that we may actually need to improvise. And if you don't have one in your first aid kit, if you do not have one in your first response kit, and you think you could fall into this category of a delayed response of emergency medical services or an arterial bleed that's hard to control, you should invest in one of these because they work. They work really well. So here's the idea on how to use this. You can see that it's leaking through. No matter how much pressure he's putting here, it's not stopping the arterial bleed. Now, one point of interest, make sure that you're actually putting direct pressure over the actual laceration. I have had calls where they couldn't get it to stop, and what happened is the bandage had moved off the point of the injury, and they were putting extremely direct pressure on a non-affected part of the arm. And so therefore the artery was allowed to not have any pressure, and of course it would remain bleeding. Once we covered it with direct pressure, the bleeding stopped and we were fine. However, in this case, we're going to say he is putting direct pressure right over the wound and it's still not stopping. Maybe he's got a bleeding issue. Maybe he's on blood thinners. It doesn't matter why. The fact is direct pressure is not controlling it. So it's leaking through. I'm going to have him let go for a moment while I slip this over. If that was a problem, I could unlace this all the way and fish it through around and then relace it. But again, 1 second of stopping the hold is not going to, it's not going to ruin the whole situation. So the point here now is that we want to put this tourniquet as close to the bleeding wound as possible. We want to damage as little good tissue as we can. So we're actually going to put this as close to that site of the injury as possible, tighten it down, and then bring it up and fasten the Velcro. Now look at this crank that's built into the actual tourniquet is now tightened. Go ahead and let go. And we're going to tighten it until the bleeding stops. So if we can see a pulsation of blood and we're turning this tightness of the tourniquet handle, you will see it eventually stop bleeding. That's when you know you have enough pressure. I'm now going to fasten it into this resting spot. With the Makeshift, you would have to tie those in place and tie another knot so it doesn't unwind. But with this tourniquet device, it actually has a cradle to hold the stick in. Now look at, if I'm actually using this tourniquet appropriately, there will be a delay in the refill of the capillary areas. This is another test. It should be delayed. It should not refill in the length of time it takes to say capillary refill. It should be longer than that. That tells me that the tourniquet is actually working and we're not allowing the blood to go past that point. I'm going to now finish the bandage, tie it off. I'm going to mark on their hand the time that I actually tied the tourniquet so that the surgeons can know how long this extremity went without oxygenation. This allows them to understand how long it takes for the tissues to die, what the rate of tissue death might be, and whether or not they can start a recirculation process and start regenerating oxygenated blood back into this oxygen-starved area. They can also help with blood clot prevention with certain medications. The point is, can we stop the bleeding before the person goes into hypovolemic shock? That's really the idea here. We've just got a lot of good skills now to try to prevent the loss of limb, even with tourniquet use. So if this is a life-threatening bleed, can't be controlled with direct pressure, consider use of tourniquets, and we could actually save this person's limb, but for sure save their life. While commercial tourniquets have clear advantages like ease of use, speed, and reliability, there may be moments when they're not at hand and therefore necessitate improvisation. To make your tourniquet, gather a sturdy fabric like gauze, for instance, or think of like a thick necktie, strip, or maybe even a piece of t-shirt, roughly 2 inches wide. This width minimizes tissue damage. Additionally, you'll need a windlass, which is a rigid tool like a pen or stick. Place the tourniquet 2 to 3 inches above the injury. If the source of the bleeding is unclear, go high up on the limb, close to the torso. Wrap your fabric strip around the limb, tie a basic square knot, position the windlass atop, and tie another knot. Then, twist the windlass until the pulse is gone. Essentially, you're tightening the tourniquet until we stop blood flow. If you're unfamiliar with pulse checking, just ensure the bleeding is stopped. Remember, this might be uncomfortable for the patient, but it's a life-saving measure and follows national guidelines. Lastly, secure your windlass, preventing unintentional unwinding. Use the leftover fabric or any other suitable material to do this. Tourniquets, simple as they might seem, can be the difference between life and death in a serious hemorrhage. In fact, they're so important, many institutions are now placing bleeding kits right alongside AEDs. But remember, no matter which you opt for, consistent practice is key.